Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here in Orlando, Florida for the Air Force Association's annual Air Warfare Symposium, the #1 winter gathering of U.S. Air Force leaders, industry executives, thought leaders, analysts, as well as the media down here in Florida, where our coverage is sponsored by Leonardo DRS and L3 Technologies, and we're positively honored to have with us the Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force, General Sevi Wilson. Sir, thanks very much for making time for us, and what a fantastic discussion you had with Mark Cuban, the entrepreneur. Why are conversations like that so important? You know, last year we saw General Spencer, your predecessor, is the president of the Air Force Association, at least for just a little bit longer, who had a conversation with Jeff Bezos. Why are dialogues like this so important for you and so important for the entrepreneurial community, since you're the Chief Innovation Officer of the Air Force?
Well, first of all, this is a great diversity of thought, right? We get outside of our little stovepipe of only military thinking and the folks that we deal with, and bring in guys, in Mark's case, who's a Mavericks owner, he's in TVs and media, he thinks differently, and let's bring his ideas and see what has worked for him and how do we apply that to what would work for us in the military. So it's actually a two-way conversation. We're hoping that we'll learn something, but we also hope that he'll be around our airmen and maybe teach a little something about what our Department of Defense is doing, what our Air Force is doing, and how we can both help each other.
And so what do you think the key lessons are for each side of this dialogue, right? What is it important that the entrepreneurial community learn about the Air Force, and what's important for the Air Force to learn about the entrepreneurial community and how they work and think?
Yeah, first of all, you see how we think differently. You saw him when he was on the Spark Tank, right? That he was, what's this do for me? How do you communicate this idea? Have you thought big enough? Have you scaled it fast enough? What's the alternative? And he's making us think in ways that probably we haven't thought before. And so that's the goodness that he brings to it. I also thought that he had a couple of really important parts on the ability to communicate your idea, right? Because I got a bunch of brilliant guys, but if they can't communicate that concept, that belief, they're not getting anywhere with him. The second piece is how do we take big ideas and not just, you know, he would say go bold, go big. You just tried to make an incremental change, and sometimes that's good enough, but did you really reach for the brass bar? And so when he talked about be fearless. So what? We fail. Right, he talked about, I failed lots of times. It's okay. We're going to dust ourselves off. We're going to figure out why we failed, and we're going to go at it again and do it better. And this time we're not going to fail. But failure is a whole part of this whole innovation part that we're doing. I'm going to tell you, I don't want everybody to go out there and all we do is fail. But certainly we have to. We're not going to get it at 100% every time. We're going to have some missteps. We're going to figure out what we did wrong, and then try and make it better.
Yeah, I mean, that was, he also talked about, he could have, this guy named Travis called up with this idea called Uber.
And whoops, yeah, swung and missed, yeah, but okay. But he also said, hey, water under the bridge, there's lots of other things out there, I'm moving on. I forget what his analogy that he used behind that. But again, I think we can learn from that, right?
So let me ask you about all of the initiatives, right? I mean, every time we talk, we get a little bit of an update on where we are. You have the Vice Chief Challenge, obviously, which is a very important thing. You're going to be in New York next week with Dr. Will Roper, the acquisition executive, where you guys are doing a pitch fest, about 300 proposals you guys are going to have to sift through. Talk to us about where we are.
I'll give a couple of pieces of this. So let's do the Vice Chief Challenge. So remember, we started with how do I crowdsource airmen's ideas? And rather than go bottom up, which is good, how do I also go top down on a really hard problem? In this case, multi-domain operations. And how do I connect, share, and learn across airspace and cyber? And how would I do a visualization of that idea? So we've got lots of ideas. We've downsourced to now a few of those ideas. We're going to bring in industry and academia, and we're going to continue to further refine those, hopefully here by AFA fall. So in September, I won't say we will pick the winner, but we're going to have the winning, the best ideas come forward, and then we're going to present those at AFA in September. So that's the Vice Chief Challenge. Right. Pitch Day, right? So Pitch Day is, you saw we got lots of bureaucracy, and how do I get people, small businesses, on contract fast? And so they've gone out, they've searched across a bunch of small businesses. They took 300 of them. We've actually scaled down to just under 60. I think it's 59. They're going to give pitches to us. And the goal is same day, swipe a GPC card, put you on contract for, and again, we have $40 million set aside for small businesses to now work with the Air Force. And that's a big improvement from, we've done this before where we did 100 contracts inside 40 hours. what Dr. Roper did before, we got about 200 submissions to do that, right? And this time we got over 300 submissions, so the word's getting out, hey, we are a place for business, the Air Force is open, and small businesses jumping into it. So both of those, I think, are good. We're making really good progress.
There was a speed thing, right? Everybody's talking about accelerating it. Dr. Roper is talking about, we've already taken 70 years, yet that
78
century.
years.
78 years, okay.
We're going for 100, but 78 years.
That's right, because it was the century challenge. And one of the greatest airmen in this hall is Lieutenant General Tom Stafford, the Apollo 10 commander, one of America's great airmen, one of America's greatest, and one of the world's greatest astronauts is here. And he and I were talking and catching up a little bit, and one of the things he was talking about was sort of the speed of the space program. That once the decision was made to do lunar rendezvous, in sort of like 5 years, we built 2 of the largest buildings in the world. We built multiple rockets, the F-1.
Biggest rocket in the world.
Biggest rocket in the world, the deep space communications, all these networks that were all ready to go for Apollo 8, which was the first translunar mission. What can we learn? It's the 50th anniversary year of the Apollo moon landings. 2 of the 3-man crew were airmen, Buzz Aldrin and Mike Collins.
No, you're taking all my words, because I use this as a great example.
Right.
We've been there before. We know how to do this, right? But we had a clear vision on what we're going to do, and we as a nation were all in. Right? But we went from a little over 8 years, from May 25th, 1961, when President Kennedy said, we're going to the moon and back, till July 69, we went to the moon and back. And look at what we did across the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, 36 space launches. Right? We had some really big failures. Right? We had Apollo 1, Gus Grissom, Ed Wright, and Roger Chaffee. Huge setback, but it didn't stop us. Right? We were going to get to the moon and back, and we had competition. Right, and as you talked to Gerald Stafford, amazing guy. I sat down with him recently, and again, this whole culture of we can do this. So I tried to frame earlier kind of the 3 things that I've been talking about. Why? What's different? Well, we're in this great power competition. That's our why. We look at what our potential adversaries are doing, how fast they're modernizing, what their mega projects are, what they're investing in, and their whole of nation in. So that's that's the competition. So what, I use that exact analogy of the space program, and 50 years ago, as a nation, we came together against a competitor and said, we're going to get there, we're going to win. So the what, and the who is us. Look, ordinary Americans across the world, we put these people, the astronauts, on a pedestal. If you were to ask him, he goes, hey, I was just doing my job. I was just trying to make a difference. Again, so I look across the force and say, hey, all of us, I want you to join us on our journey, because we're in it to win. You're United States Air Force.
Let me take you back to one of the things that Mark Cuban said, which was the focus on artificial intelligence. He was talking about it from almost the ground up to make sure you're educating airmen on that. When it comes to the AI challenge, and he basically, he put a marker down and saying that, look, China is in the lead in this. From your standpoint, or is investing heavily in it, right? From your perspective, how do you work that part of the problem when a lot of people don't even fully understand what AI really is and what it can mean and do?
Yeah. So here's a couple things I'd say. So when we talk to the Defense Innovation Board, guys like Eric Schmidt and bringing Mark and his ideas along are really important too. China is doing things differently. They're doing it at scale. They're graduating 8 times the STEM graduates. They don't have the same privacy concerns. They don't have the same intellectual property concerns. Right? So I'll say another way. They're taking stuff from us. They're modifying it for them. What they do with the data, we would have real big privacy concerns. Look at the app WeChat. 1/3 of the world's internet users use WeChat, of which the Chinese government gets all the data. So they know where you're going, who you're talking to, what you're doing, what you're spending. All that data goes to China. That gives them an advantage and some insights on this artificial intelligence, machine data, big learning competition. They also have pretty talented folks. So again, that's a competition, and now we know that. We have to be able to compete against that. I would argue that our academia, some of our universities, whether it be MIT, whether it's Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, some of the world leaders in artificial intelligence, the really smart people are working there. Our national labs, incredible. They're doing some incredible stuff. Industry, you look at all the big industry giants, whether it be Google, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, they're doing some incredible stuff. The department's doing some pretty good stuff, but we've got to come together, all of us, much like I think that we did in the space program, to say, hey, folks, this is really important. We can't get behind in here. right? And we got to stay in the forefront. But it's going to take all of us working together to be able to do that.
I've got a lot of questions I want to ask you, but I'm going to ask you the one question, which is space. The President signed National Space Policy Directive 4, orders the Air Force to establish a Space Corps, short of a Space Force at this point, but he indicated that that's certainly the road that he wants to go on. At this point, there is going to be a debate on it. But talk to us what the plan that the Air Force has to execute this and to do it in the best way to yield the best results at the end of the day, which is what this initiative, at least its supporters argue, is the point.
Yeah, let me just start off with the great news that the President's done is get space around the kitchen tables and coffee tables in America about how important it is, because there's nothing, the Joint Force, and quite frankly, there's nothing America doesn't do that doesn't involve space. And we've been the world leaders in space. We're the ones who designed everything from GPS to the worldwide communications to missile warning and satellite communication happens from your United States Air Force. Everybody, we're the envy of the world, but we also know that our adversaries have looked at it, they've studied us, they've seen what we're doing, and they're trying to catch up, and we're trying to stay ahead. So that's why this elevating space is so important. That's why we're standing up a new combatant command for space, and that's why the President's put out the Space Policy Directive 4. So what we've done is we've got a planning team underway, led by a 2-star, who's bringing together the team to make sure that we can take all the inputs, to be transparent across it, to be able to bring forward a plan, to be able to execute the President's directive from Space Policy Directive 4.
And roughly how long do you think it'll be before we see reporting the fruits of that work?
Yeah, we should see that. I think there's a couple things going forward. There's a legislative proposal going forward imminently. I think it was released today or last night, so we should see that, more detail on that. And the planning effort, initial tranche feedback to the Secretary within about 30 days, and then we're going to see where that takes us from there. That won't be the final thing, but we owe her an interim feedback within 30 days.
I've covered the Air Force for now since 1993. And throughout that time, the Air Force has always had a focus on space. You know, as even a historian of the Air Force was into space before it was the United States Air Force. It was the Army Air Forces, and Hap Arnold was already looking at that. The Scientific Advisory Board was looking at the high ground. From a narrative standpoint, though, this idea has sort of taken over that somehow the Air Force was sort of mismanaging in space. Does the Air Force have to do a better job in sort of countering that narrative at some point, given how much time, attention, money, resources the Air Force has invested in this to create this architecture?
We need to be able to tell our story about what our Air Force is doing today across everything in space. And how we've been really good stewards. We're the gold standard of which every country in the world is envious of our space capability, and the United States Air Force are the ones who've been doing that. So I think we just have to do a better job telling that story to the American public.
General Sevy Wilson, Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force. Sir, thanks very much. Tremendous job with Mark Cuban on the stage.
I had a great time. He didn't include me in the will, though. That's next time. He will include me in the will.
I know, really. For a stepbrother, you know.
I should have been in the will.
Sir, thanks again.
Have a great time.